Hello, friends. This is a presentation from a rural medical college hospital near Hyderabad in India. And today we shall be learning around the global health challenges in resolving diagnostic and therapeutic uncertainty around a 62-year-old woman with chronic cough and hemoptysis. Our aim is to achieve competency in documenting and analyzing the data around the patient by means of clinical findings, diagnostic laboratory and imaging techniques in order to understand the global health challenges, followed by achieving impactful global solutions through patient centered learning. The 62-year-old female came to OPD with chief complaints of cough with expectoration and shortness of breath since 1 month, fever since 1 month, vomiting and loose stools since 4 days. In history of present illness, patient was apparently asymptomatic 20 years back. Later, she had intermittent cough once in a month, which was relieved on taking medication. But 1 month ago, she had high-grade fever with chills associated with low backache, shortness of breath and cough with expectoration, which was insidious in onset for this. She went to the hospital where she was diagnosed with anemia, managed conservatively and was on ceftriaxone. Symptoms aggravated more since 4 days. Blood in sputum and wheeze was present. History of vomiting since 4 days, which are 4 to 6 episodes per day. Food and water as content, non-bile stained, non-blood stained. History of loose stool since 4 days, 4 to 6 episodes per day. History of loss of appetite and significant weight loss was present, and no history of burning, maturation, melena, or headache was there. Now we will see how a thorough analysis of the history helped enlist the various differentials by identifying where is the problem.
So where is the problem? Yeah, we don't want to listen to the history and all. We are starting from the end. Yeah, so he's saying respiratory problem. So it is in the respiratory system, but then which part of the respiratory system? It's such a big area. So what is making you think that she's got a respiratory problem? You just heard her. Cough. Yes, the cough itself suggests a respiratory problem. Okay, what else? Where is the respiratory problem? On your findings and everything, what very. So you see, it's very important in the long case in respiratory system. It's all finite. They have slotted it into different morphologic diagnoses. So can you tell us, examiners, what are the morphologic diagnoses of the respiratory system? Bronchiectasis, yes, that's the MBBS diagnosis. Bronchiectasis, okay, yes. Bronchial asthma, very good. What else? COPD. Pneumonia, consolidation. Basically lobar consolidation, upper lobe, lower lobe, consolidation. Okay. Because when you say pneumonia, it is not just the anatomical pathological diagnosis, it is also including etiology into it. So we would want the morphologic diagnosis, yes. Pleural effusion, yes, the simplest one, commonest one, yes. No, that is etiology. So morphologic diagnosis is upper lobe collapse, upper lobe consolidation. So you are saying upper lobe collapse, you are saying lower lobe collapse, and middle lobe collapse, and lung mass. Yes, pneumothorax. Good, pneumothorax. And collapse, consolidation, lung mass, pleural pathologies like pneumothorax, pleural effusion, even pleural mass lesions, and bronchiectasis, bronchial disorders like bronchiectasis, chronic bronchitis, inflammation, and emphysema, disruption of the alveoli. Anything outside the alveoli, which is again a very common morphologic diagnosis, interstitial lung disease. So you see, you have covered the entire respiratory system. Now which one does she fit in? Now there is another thing, we are talking about lung mass, but what about masses outside the lung? Mediastinal masses. So you can have mediastinal masses also. It can be in the anterior mediastinum, it can be in the posterior mediastinum. So what are the structures which tell you where the mediastinum is? Where is the upper mediastinum? In the clinical examination, what structure in the clinical finding tells you the upper mediastinal problem? And what clinical finding tells you the lower mediastinal problem? Which one? So I want to know about the upper mediastinum. What do I palpate here on clinical examination? Trachea, yes. So trachea is representing the upper mediastinum. And I want to know the lower mediastinum, what do I palpate? Apex of the heart, yes. So he is going to tell us about the upper and lower mediastinum. Has it shifted or not? So tell us, has the mediastinum shifted? Because if there is a pleural effusion, it will be pushing from that side and it will shift to the other side. If there is a lung mass, it will also push. And if it is a collapse, it will pull. Collapse, fibrosis, it will pull. So
Moving on, No significant history of past illness were noticed. In her family history, her brother had similar complaints, died 25 years ago. Her sister has similar complaints of chronic cough and shortness of breath and takes inhalers. In this beautiful illustration by an intern, it helped us further analyze the familiar relation of the existing problems of the patient.
Both of them are not affected. This is affected. Somebody was affected like this. And here, if you had a bigger tree, like their sisters, brothers, then if you saw somebody affected there, then it would be looking like this. It's transmitting like this. So what is this transmission? Oblique transmission. Whereas, if this generation was also affected, somebody was affected there and coming like this, vertical transmission. So vertical is dominant transmission. Autosomal dominant. And oblique would have been this as it. So we don't know the transmission here, but yeah, it seems like some familial problem is going on, and that too with hemoptysis. So maybe some pathology in the lung, which is because of a gene.
Finally, in menstrual and marital history, patient attained menarche at 13 years of age and married at 14 years of age. Her menstrual cycles were regular and attained menopause by 45 years of age. And now we shall move on to the clinical examinations of the patient, which will further help us narrow down the differentials and management of the patient. On general examination, patient was conscious, oriented to time, place and person and cooperative. Was thin built and malnourished. Skin fold thickness was 4 mm. Pallor was present, cholynochia was present, clubbing was present with fluctuations, no signs of icterus, cyanosis, generalized lymphadenopathy and pedal Picture alongside does not only highlight the malnourished stature of the patient but also shows her ichthyotic skin. Muscle wasting was present in temporalis, deltoid and lower limb region. Hair was shiny and scanty, angular cheilitis, glossitis, bulky red tongue with saddle nose deformity, and greyish white patch is seen over soft palate.
Yeah, did you see, her tongue? Did you see you guys over to tell us the findings. What are the findings in this lady? General examination. What are the findings in the tongue? What are the findings in the nails? Look at the nails and tell us. Colonychia. You cannot comment on the hygiene. Hygiene is a judgmental thing. You can only say whether there is inflammation or not or something. Okay. Here, the tongue. Let's see the tongue. Yeah, you shared only with me. How? So look at the tongue. Beautifully captured. This tongue has been captured very well. So what is shown in the tongue?
So there is poor hygienity. There is angular cheilitis.
And you can see that the tongue is also quite bad, and there is angular cheilitis in this patient. So you can see that tongue is like glossitis. You can't see the papilla. It's a smooth tongue. So this again says iron deficiency, and it can also be seen in vitamin B12 deficiency. These are like also glossitis. So these are very important things which we.
Moving ahead with the examination of the respiratory system, on inspecting we found cervical trachea to be central, Strel sign was positive, drooping of shoulder on left side, Broadbent sign positive, which was systolic retraction in third and fourth intercostal spaces. Kyphosis was seen with medial border prominence of scapula. Dilated veins were seen over neck, right upper anterior aspect and left hemithorax. Barrel-shaped chest was seen with pulsations in the suprasternal, left mid-clavicular line below the nipples, epigastric area, posteriorly left side lower thoracic region, and abdominothoracic type respiration was seen, with decreased respiratory movement in left upper and middle zone. Accessory muscle uses was present of sternocleidomastoid and scalenus muscles. Before we move further ahead with the physical examination, let us see the significance of examining certain signs on inspection.
Trachea is also divided to the left. Very good. So if his trachea is divided to the left, what sign would we see here? Without showing the face. Yeah, you can see this. What is that sign called? Trail sign, isn't it? So what is trail sign? The prominence of that sternomastoid where the trachea has deviated, isn't it? So is it prominent? It's a subjective thing. We'll have to see and think whether it's prominent. But he thinks it's prominent. Not only that, he has also put his fingers here and he's seeing he's not able to go in much. Whereas here he's able to go in a lot. See, he has went in this much here and here he has only gone this much. So probably it is all deviated here. That's why he cannot insinuate his fingers here. See, only this much I can insinuate. Very tight here. The strap muscle is very tight. And here I can still go in a lot. But then this is also subjective. If I am biased, he has biased me. So I have put my fingers a little bit inside more. And here also I haven't put my fingers a bit more. So that is called cognitive bias.
On palpating, we found mediastinal tracheal shift to the right side with left side overcrowding of ribs. Apex beat felt over left to left mid axillary line in fifth intercostal space, about 4 cm, anteroposterior diameter of 24 cm, and transverse diameter of 24 cm, with decreased respiratory movements on the left side both anteriorly and posteriorly in all the zones.
What are the mediastinum first? Where is the apex beat? Where is the trachea?
Apex beat more lateral to the fourth intercostal
So apex beat is the fourth intercostal space, but it is
space. More lateral.
lateral. So where is the normal apex beat normally located?
The middle of the clavicle.
So a normal apex beat is located 2.5 centimeters medial to the midclavicular line. So he is saying it is lateral to the midclavicular line. How much lateral? 4 centimeters lateral to the middle. That's very high. So it has been pushed. The lower mediastinum has been pushed like anything. The heart has been pushed like anything. Isn't it 4 centimeters away? That means 4 plus 2.5 centimeters away from where it was supposed to be. So there's a massive mediastinal shift of the basically the heart, which is indicated by that. So who is pushing the heart to the left side? Is it the pleural effusion on the right side, or is it a lung mass on the right side, or is it some consolidation on the right side? Who is doing that? Or is it a pneumothorax on the right side? So this is the question now. So you see how the question keeps on changing. So okay, so very good finding. He has given us some indication that the mediastinum is shifted.
And now we will see the findings from tone struck by the physician's hand on the body of mortal beings.
Other than palpation, what else? Percussion.
On percussing directly, dullness was heard over left clavicle and resonance on sternum. Indirectly, resonance heard anteriorly on right supraclavicular, infraclavicular, supramammary, axillary, and posteriorly on suprascapular, interscapular, infrascapular. Dullness anteriorly heard over left supraclavicular, axillary, infraaxillary, right inframammary, and infraaxillary regions. Posteriorly, dullness on left suprascapular and infrascapular regions, and stony dullness on interscapular regions was heard.
Clavicular percussion we start with. So this is how it is done. See, I can hear some sounds, but here it's dull. I can hear
Flatness was
something
heard
here,
anteriorly
but
on
here
left
it's dull.
infraclavicular,
And
supramammary, mammary, and inframammary regions.
Here also
Posteriorly
it's dull.
on left infrascapular region. Let's see how those chords by the physicians help us compare and contrast between the normal and abnormal findings.
Dull. Resonant. Dull. Resonant. Dull. Isn't it? Resonant. Dull. Dull. Isn't it? So this entire area is dull. So when you percuss here, the normal cardiac dullness is below the sternum here. This will be all dull, and a little bit will be dull to the left fourth intercostal space. That is where there's a cardiac notch over the area of the heart. So, but then in the lungs it will be slightly more resonant, but that difference in resonance here and the cardiac resonance cannot be made out by normal ears, but then physicians had abnormal ears. So they made this distinction between superficial cardiac dullness and deep cardiac dullness. Have you heard about it in your clinical books? Huh? Yeah, good. So you have heard about it, isn't it? So superficial cardiac dullness and deep cardiac. So deep cardiac dullness is the abnormal hearing of the physicians, which you have to imagine. This is lung, this is heart. So there may be some difference, but very difficult to make out by mere mortals. So, but what is the superficial cardiac dullness? That's the most important. Where is that? If you remember your picture of when the heart is opened, let's say you cut the chest and you open the chest wall, what do you see? That picture is there in your book, in your anatomy book. It should be there in your minds. How does the heart look like? Can you see the heart there? As soon as you cut open the chest, is the heart visible? How much is visible? That is the superficial cardiac dullness. How much is visible? Very little, just a little bit on the fourth intercostal space, a little area. Why? Because there the lung has a lingular lobe. There's a small notch in the lung. So through that notch the heart is peeping out. So that is the superficial cardiac. So you will have a little bit of dullness only here. Plus what? In the sternum, it will be dull. In the mid-sternum area, the heart is there and the lungs are not covering the entire sternum. So in the sternum, mid-sternum area, it will be dull. Because the lungs are stopping here. And then the lungs are giving a notch here. So it will be dull in the mid-sternum and then it will be dull in the notch. So that is the cardiac dullness. But you will be surprised to see in this patient, the entire area is dull. Which is dull. Now here, if you percuss, you will find that that area, not only that area, the entire area of the precordium is dull. So what is happening here? What could be the possibility? Because heart itself is a mediastinal structure. What is around the heart which can give rise to this kind of dullness? Pericardium, yes, so it could be a pericardial effusion. Is it a pericardial effusion? How to know? Or could it be some other mediastinal mass? Or could it be a lung mass which is covering that heart part, which has become, because it's become a mass now, that's why it's producing the dullness. So how do we know? Whether it's a lung mass or a pericardial effusion or something else. Yeah, so pericardial effusion may not cause rub, it will only be, rub will be present when there is no effusion, when there is inflammation alone. So yes, often with inflammation the pericardial effusion starts. So initially you have a rub and after that when the effusion has come, you won't have any rub. And again the effusion is dying up, again you will have a rub. So this is how the rub happens. So here there is no rub, but there could still be a pericardial effusion. So how do we know whether it's a pericardial effusion causing the dullness, or it's a lung mass causing the dullness, or it is something else? So if she had such a big pericardial effusion, she would have symptoms because of that, and we could have known that. Okay, maybe clinically, is there any other way, Sophia? See, if there was a pericardial effusion like that, what would have happened to the apex? Would you have been able to appreciate it? You wouldn't have been able to appreciate the apex beat, which he is able to. He's saying it's in the fourth centimeters outside the mid-cervical line. That means there's no pericardial effusion. And of course, auscultation also, you couldn't hear the heart sound. You would have been muffled. So he's not heard that. They're not muffled. So this means that there is no pericardial effusion. So what are we left with? It could be some other mediastinal mass, or it could be a lung mass. The lung itself is there, covering that mediastinal area. So either a lung mass or a mediastinal mass. So how do we differentiate both? That would be difficult to differentiate, isn't it? So I think we have to do a investigation for that.
On auscultating, we heard decreased air entry in both the lung areas, bilateral coarse crepitations heard in both the lung areas, egophony and bronchophony was present. Tubular bronchi sounds were present in the left supraclavicular, infraclavicular, supramammary, mammary, inframammary, suprascapular, interscapular and infrascapular areas. Abdominal examination, distended abdomen with everted umbilicus, distended abdominal veins, shifting dullness, mild splenomegaly, bowel sounds was heard. Whereas in CVS examinations, S1 and S2 were heard with no murmurs. On CNS examination, no focal neuronal deficits were seen. These are what we found on the laboratory investigation findings of arterial blood gas, liver function test, renal function test. Here we also see the electrocardiogram with no specific abnormalities highlighted. On 2D echocardiography, moderate tricuspid regurgitation with pulmonary artery hypertension seen, mild mitral regurgitation and aortic regurgitation, left anterior descending hypokinesia, right coronary artery left circumflex hypokinesia, no aortic stenosis or mitral stenosis seen, moderate left ventricular dysfunctions and diastolic dysfunction seen, no pulmonary embolism. On USG, bilateral grade 1 renal parenchymal disease changes present. Here we see chest X-ray AP and PAV respectively, suggesting lung collapse on both sides with possible cavitary lesion in right upper lobe. Lower mediastinal shift on right side with inwardly pulled right costophrenic angle.
This is not actually a chest X-ray, it's a spine X-ray. In chest X-ray it needs to be a PA view, but what you have here is a AP view where the vertical column looks more prominent. So we are not really looking at the chest per se, we are looking at the spinal and vertebral one. So let's go to, which is showing you how deformed the spine is. Of course, there is some rotation also, but still you can make out that there is a deformity of the spine here. So how does it happen? In COPD also, when you have hyperinflated lungs, you can have such kind of a spinal deformity because of hyperinflated lungs itself, COPD itself. But it seems she has this since childhood. Somebody else?
So now in order to have a better clarity, we used a better X-ray modality HRCT, suggesting mass-like consolidation in left upper lobe extensions. The differential diagnoses were neoplasm with bronchoalveolar carcinoma, infections that could be bacterial, fungal, or actinomycotic, lymphoma, which was less likely, bronchiectasis in the left lower lobe, right middle lobe, and lingular lobe of left upper lobe. So biopsy was suggested by the radiologists.
We have that or now we got this X-ray. So this is a much more detailed X-ray where we take X-rays from all directions and then we make up an image, which is very. So here is where the problem with the percussion was. When we were percussing, this area was coming down, and you see it's looking like a very opaque, and I mean there's no air bronchogram also here. A little bit here. Can we see another image? Yeah, unfortunately it's only taken two. And here you can see some air bronchogram. So when you see air bronchograms, that indicates consolidation. Very minimal seen here, but if you look at the entire CT in the rat spa, you will find that in many places there are air bronchograms. But yes, in many places very well deeply consolidated. So even our radiologist felt it was probably a malignancy which was behaving as a consolidation. So you see, when you make the diagnosis of a respiratory system, you have this morphologic diagnosis. So it can be a bronchial problem, which could be a bronchiectasis or bronchial asthma. It could be a lobar problem. So lobar problem could be either a mass lesion, lung mass, or it could be a consolidation, or it could be a collapse. So it can be upper lobar collapse, lower lobar collapse, middle lobar collapse, and similarly consolidation. So here is one of the morphologic diagnoses of consolidation, and we don't know whether there is a collapse associated or not. Whether that collapse has given rise to partial collapse, giving rise to consolidation because of infection. We do not know that. Because she is having this non-resolving consolidation for 1 month. So at that point of time, when the radiologist told us that it looks malignancy is a high possibility and this is a mass lesion, and we expected there would be a malignant growth here in the lung.
So now in order to finally rule out the diagnostic uncertainties enlisted as differentials from radiology, a combined decision was taken to do a lung biopsy. On microscopy of the tissue obtained from biopsy from the lung lesion shows mostly macrophages, few lymphocytes and plasma cells, and to our surprise, no cancerous cells, indicating of resolving or organizing pneumonia. Could it be bronchiolitis obliterans organizing pneumonia or BOOP? In bronchoalveolar carcinoma, usually we find lepetic growth pattern, starting from bronchial wall extending into the alveoli, which is not present here. Often these necrotic cancerous cells fill up the alveoli, resembling a pneumonic consolidation in chest X-ray. Now, little did we know that the intention of the needle was to elicit a pneumonia. However, it still did not zero us upon a final diagnosis, as the uncertainties around the etiology of this non-resolving pneumonia that has been there over a month now still persisted. Some common causes happens to be tuberculosis, malignancy, immune-mediated conditions like BOOP. Well, if BOOP, then what could be the immunopathogenic basis of it? However, it could also be something that the pneumonia has been obscuring. Maybe an endobronchial growth.
No. It won't be zoomed. It's a low power view. So let's go to a high power view. So now can you tell us what these dots are? Not very well visible. But yeah, these are the cells that you see in the blood all the time. What are these cells? Yeah, what we did was we got it in a pneumonia. Now the question is, why was the pneumonia non-resolving? Why 1 month? 1 month nobody has pneumonia like this. And that too, what such a pneumonia producing such a lobar consolidation, not resolving. What is happening? This is not a normal pneumonia by any scope. So in a way we were right. This was an abnormal thing, and most likely she still has some abnormality which the pneumonia is hiding. So what could that be? So we often know that if you have an endobronchial growth, it causes a collapse consolidation. So is this non-resolving pneumonia because of that endobronchial growth which is hiding beyond this CT scan, which we can only see by putting a bronchoscope inside the bronchi, and we may be able to see the growth itself. And then we'll take the biopsy from there, then we'll get the diagnosis. And then we'll be happy that yes, we have got a diagnosis. But the patient will not. For the patient, if she has only this is much better. But we can't explain how can somebody have an pneumonia for 1 month. Because non-resolved, of course, there is a chapter in your book called non-resolving pneumonia. And in that, there are many causes. And one of them is, of course, tuberculosis. Another is malignancy. And another is some immune-mediated condition called BOOP, bronchiolitis obliterans organizing pneumonia. So often PGs do seminars on all these things. Could this be that then? And what is the immunopathogenic basis of these conditions? That is what we have to look for. So this is how much we have to go deeper. But again, it's finite. It's not a lot.
So let's see what the lenses of the bronchoscopes had for us. So here we see the bronchoscopy at different level, showing the epiglottis, glottis, the bifurcation at carina, and those thick mucus secretion obstructing the airway, but no endobronchial growth. So the samples of sputum and bronchoalveolar lavage that were sent for microbiological investigations grew two different organisms, E. coli and Klebsiella species, that were suggestive of commensals. As far as the diagnostic microbiology setup is concerned, we primarily base it on repeated isolation, plausibility, and the presence of the organism in large numbers. For example, in this patient, we have seen that the primary pathology was an organized non-resolving pneumonia. Pneumonia is primarily caused by pneumococci, staphylococci, hemophilus, etc. So to isolate E. coli from the sample raise questions, as E. coli being a primary pneumonic pathogen is quite unheard of. The second thing is a correlation with the direct smear of the specimen. The number of gram-negative bacilli were not quite high enough, which doesn't quite agree with the isolation organism. However, we also must remember that patient is on long-term antibiotics, probably which could have contributed to further thinning of the organismal numbers. Klebsiella is a feasible pathogen, and its isolation can be considered important. That's when we have to double check the other parameters, such as the presence of pus cells, and correlate with direct smear. Klebsiella is also a commensal, which makes it even more confounding. So probably here, the low numbers of organisms in the direct smear coupled with a paucity of pus cells contributes to the conclusions that the Klebsiella is not fitting into the pathogen category. Another important feature is the presence or absence of inflammatory cells. In this case, the inflammatory cells were very few on microscopy. Also, no acid-fast bacilli was seen, and we couldn't get sputum CB-nat or mycobacterial cultures due to resource limitations. And we tried ruling out viral etiologies as well in this pandemic for COVID-19, where RT-PCR was negative. So now looking at the summary of events in the patient's life, since her birth till the year 2000, she was apparently asymptomatic. Later she developed intermittent cough once in a month, resolved with medications. In Jan 2021, she developed fever with chills, low backache, shortness of breath, cough with expectoration, and then she went to a registered medical practitioner, diagnosed with anemia, treated conservatively, and was on ceftriaxone. Around February 2021, she arrived with chief complaints of aggravated symptoms, blood in sputum, vomiting, loose stools, and appetite loss. Then she was admitted to the hospital, where this very important data was maintained by the interns and PG that shows the variation of the vitals of the patient, especially the temperature, which did not show much improvement with antibiotic therapy. However, the patient's overall improvement with time, the slow resolution of the consolidation on chest, suggested the probable wonder of the steroids over the time, which has been administered to her via nebulization. We looked at all possible etiologies and differentials for the patient's left upper lobe consolidation. In terms of pathogenic bacteria like Mycobacterium tuberculosis, pneumococci, staphylococci, Klebsiella, hemophilus, etc. Also viral causes, we rule out malignancy, and then we finally settle into thinking it as immune mediated. Perhaps the diagnostic uncertainty is still not resolved 100%, and so we wanted to share a realistic scenario with our global audience and make them realize how one may have to treat a patient in spite of persistent diagnostic uncertainty due to resource limitations. And one of the ways we are looking forward to resolving this diagnostic uncertainty is through maintaining informational continuity with the patient and learning from her response to our current therapy, and a global discussion via conversational discussion support system. In this extensive learning experience, under the guidance of Professor Rakesh Biswas sir, as a BMJ elective student during my stay at Kamineni Institute of Medical Sciences, I saw many challenging and brainstorming cases, where efficient data collection, its interpretation through discussion and literature review helped many cases, including this 62-year-old female with cough and hemoptysis. Shared data through e-logs brought global inputs around the patient, where the benefit to the local treating team through enthusiastic patient-centered learning, deeper thinking, brought enhanced outcomes in improving quality of life of the patient. So that's all around this patient. Thank you for your patient listening.